Take out Russia's energy and Vladimir Putin's war machine collapses. That has been Ukraine's philosophy for much of 2025, and one into which the country has thrown itself even further during the latter half of 2025. Strike after strike has taken out oil refineries and other facilities, with the occasional attack also targeting Russia's war centers such as air bases. These attacks have been escalating in size and effectiveness. Now Ukraine has just launched its most impressive strike of all. In a great night for Ukraine, the country's biggest strike of the war has hit many targets and has made Russia burn. That's according to a December 11th report by the Kyiv Post, which says that the armed forces of Ukraine launched both its largest and widest-reaching series of kamikaze drone strikes overnight in an operation that goes down as one of the most impressive of the entire war. Ukraine delivered an early Christmas present by sending 300 of its long-range drones hurtling all over Russia, some accompanied by cruise missiles, to strike a host of different targets across a 2,000-kilometer or around 1,240-mile stretch of the country. Among Ukraine's targets were several oil refineries, several airfields, and, in a first for the Ukraine war, an oil rig located in the Caspian Sea. Ukraine also sent drones in the direction of Moscow. But all was not as it seemed with that early attempt at a strike. The Kyiv Post reports that Ukraine launched about a fifth or approximately 60 of its drones at Moscow. However, the outlet also later contradicts itself, claiming that Ukraine actually sent more than 100 drones Moscow's way, which would account for about a third of the total launched. Regardless, those drones didn't have any specific targets. Instead, they arrived in the Russian capital and began circling, triggering a massive air defense response to shoot them down. Moscow reacted exactly as Ukraine wanted, as the drones forced local authorities to issue a general warning to the city's residents to head toward air raid shelters. Plus, 4 of Moscow's airports were placed on lockdown for between 8 and 10 hours, leading to thousands of passengers being stranded after between 130 and 200 flights were cancelled. None of Ukraine's Moscow drones hit any targets, and that was the point. This initial horde of drones was used by Ukraine as a distraction to keep Russian defenders busy, as the other 240 or so drones that Ukraine sent into Russia headed toward their targets. It was a brilliant decoy strategy, not least because Ukraine knew that Russia had to take any drones heading in Moscow's direction very seriously. Not only is Moscow the home of the Kremlin and often the location where Putin is most likely to be, but Ukraine has also hit Moscow several times in the past. March 11th saw Ukraine attack the Moscow region in what the BBC described as the biggest Ukrainian airstrike up to that point in the war. A couple of months later, The Guardian reported on a series of strikes conducted in Russia's capital, which were timed to coincide with the arrival of world leaders for Putin's Victory Day parade celebrations. The December 11th attacks took advantage of the success of these earlier strikes. Russia knows that its capital city is both valuable and vulnerable, and it did everything in its power to protect it against drones that were never intended to hit targets in the first place. And with Russia's focus placed elsewhere, Ukraine could set about its business by taking out its real targets for the night. And there were a lot of these targets, starting with facilities that Ukraine has been hitting hard in 2025, oil refineries. Note that we said refineries and not refinery. That's because Ukraine's December 11th strike saw it attack 3 of Russia's oil refineries and one of its depots within a handful of hours in an attack that the Kyiv Post says broke Ukraine's usual pattern of hitting 2 or 3 refineries in one night. The outlet says that Ukrainian military bloggers, many citing evidence gathered from social media, have all but confirmed strikes against several refineries. A refinery in the Samara region, which is about 800 kilometers or 500 miles from Ukraine's border, was set ablaze. The same went for a refinery in the Afipsky region and one in Saratov, which are 400 kilometers and 600 kilometers, or 250 miles and 380 miles away from Ukraine, respectively. Ukraine's drones also hit home at a fuel storage depot in the Volgograd region, which is 700 kilometers or 435 miles away from Ukraine. Some of Ukraine's drones took even longer journeys than these. You'll find out more about those drones if you keep watching the video. The Kyiv Post claims that almost all of Ukraine's drones managed to fly unimpeded toward their targets, suggesting that the decoys sent to Moscow did their jobs perfectly. In Samara, which is the home of the Sizran oil refinery, locals claim to have seen between 15 and 20 of Ukraine's propeller-driven drones pass through their skies, with no engagement by air defense systems at all. One of those drones was reportedly filmed flying at a low altitude to skim the nearby treetops, suggesting that Ukraine was being careful enough to keep its drones outside of radar range, even if Samara's air defenses weren't firing. Afipsky had a similarly sized package of drones which set fuel tanks on fire and may have reduced the refinery's production by between 20 and 30%. In both of these cases, Ukraine struck refineries that it has hit many times already in 2025. December 11th saw the facility in Samara absorb its third strike since August, which is when Ukraine started ramping up its refinery attacks. The Fivtsia refinery has been hit even harder, as December 11th marked the sixth time since July that Ukraine's drones have crashed into that facility. According to United 24 media, there had also been at least one confirmed hit on the Saratov refinery, which Ukraine uses its FP-1 long-range drones before the most recent overnight attack. This strike repetition is part of Ukraine's new strategy. In 2024 and into the early stages of 25, Ukraine was still hitting Russian refineries, though it often did so in isolation. A strike would land and then Ukraine would search for another target, giving Russia time to repair the damage done at the offline facility. Now Ukraine is hitting as many refineries as it can, as often as it can, causing incrementally more damage with each strike. That makes repair work far more labor-intensive and time-consuming. The result is that the targeted refineries stay offline for longer. Russia's ability to produce refined oil products such as gasoline and diesel declines, leading to shortages and fewer products that the country can sell overseas. It's a strategy designed to bleed Russia dry of its most crucial resource, and each passing month sees Ukraine lean more heavily into the strategy. The Moscow Times highlighted just how heavily Ukraine has relied on refinery strikes during the latter half of 2025 in a December 1st report that revealed that Ukraine broke its monthly record for these types of attacks in November. At least 14 drone strikes against refineries were recorded during that month. The Fivtsia plant, which the outlet says is located near Krasnodar, was among them. The Moscow Times reveals that this one plant has an annual production capacity of 9.1 million tons, which may explain why Ukraine targeted it again on December 11th. The outlet also noted that Russia's refining capacity was cut from between 5.3 million and 5.5 million barrels of oil per day to 5 million as a result of these strikes, demonstrating that Ukraine's strategy of whittling away at the Russian oil monolith is slowly working. Time and time again, Ukraine hits Russia's refineries. And even after so many strikes, it appears that Russia can't do anything about Ukraine's drones. A trio of refineries, along with an oil depot, weren't the only oil-related facilities that found themselves in Ukraine's sights during the early hours of December 11th. Earlier we mentioned that some of Ukraine's drones had traveled even further than those that flew the 500 miles to Samara. Those drones had even bigger fish to fry than Russia's refineries, as Ukraine decided to target something that it had never hit before: a Lukoil oil rig located in the Caspian Sea. The Kyiv Post describes this strike and the outcome in its report. The longest-range attack hit an offshore oil production platform in the Caspian Sea, some 1,500 kilometers (932 miles) from the nearest probable Ukrainian drone launch site, scoring at least 4 hits and setting the Lukoil-owned rig pumping crude oil from 20 seabed wells on fire, the outlet said. It also claims that Ukraine likely used Lyochi drones for this strike. These drones are push-propeller unmanned aerial vehicles, or UAVs, which suggests they may have also been used for the refinery strikes mentioned earlier. Each of these UAVs can be loaded with an explosive warhead ranging between 120 and 350 kilograms, or 265 to 772 pounds, which is more than enough firepower to destroy refinery equipment, or, as happened at the Lukoil facility, set an entire oil rig on fire. The Moscow Times also reported on this part of Ukraine's December 11th campaign to strike Russian oil infrastructure, confirming that at least 4 of the country's long-range drones managed to hit their targets. The outlet also named the Lukoil facility as the Filanovsky rig, which it says is one of the largest Russian-owned oil rigs in the section of the Caspian Sea over which it has control. The rig is capable of producing around 120,000 barrels of crude oil per day, which adds up to 6 million tons of oil a year. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, the crude that Russia extracts from its Caspian Sea rigs is blended inside the country and marketed as Urals crude oil. Trading Economics reveals that this type of crude was selling for $52.34 per barrel on December 10th, which allows us to figure out just how much money Ukraine may have cost Russia with its refinery attack. Assuming the refinery is closed for just one day, and that's a big assumption to make, Russia has lost around $6.28 million thanks to Ukraine's strike. That's not a bad return for an attack completed using drones that are estimated to cost Ukraine just $200,000 per unit. Assuming the reports of 4 drones hitting their targets are accurate, Ukraine caused $6.28 million of damage for an outlay of about $800,000. Or should we say, at least $6.28 million. As the Kyiv Post points out, Russian firefighters were still battling the massive blaze caused at the Lukoil rig by midday on December 11th, and they weren't having much success. Production has been stopped and may end up halting for several days as Russia assesses and repairs the damage before getting the rig back online. So it's very possible that Russia's $6.28 million loss could become tens of millions, depending on how long it takes to bring the rig back online. This oil rig strike is unlike anything that Ukraine has pulled off before, both in terms of the target struck and where that strike was located. As CNN said in its report on the attack, the gloves are officially off when it comes to Ukraine's attacks on Russian oil and energy infrastructure. After absorbing yet another winter campaign conducted by Moscow to destroy Ukraine's energy infrastructure, Ukraine is now hitting every possible target that it can link to the war that Putin started back in February 2022. An unnamed source from within the Security Service of Ukraine, or SBU, practically told CNN as much, warning, "This is Ukraine's first strike on Russian infrastructure related to oil production in the Caspian Sea," before adding that the strike is another reminder to Russia that all its enterprises working for the war are legitimate targets. The message has been sent loud and clear. If it's Russian, and it has anything to do with oil, Ukraine now considers it fair game to strike. As impressive as all of this already is, Ukraine wasn't done. Typically, the country takes a one or the other approach when it comes to the nature of its targets. If Ukraine targets oil infrastructure one night, that will usually be the only type of target that it hits, even when it strikes several refineries or depots during that one night. The same goes for military facilities, such as ammunition storage depots. If such facilities are being targeted, Russia's oil is typically safe, at least for a night, but not on December 11th. Ukraine decided to twist the Lyochi-shaped knife it had plunged into Russia's side by hitting military targets along with oil-related targets. The Kyiv Post says that Ukraine followed up its attack on the Lukoil rig and the refineries we mentioned earlier by sending drones far and wide across Russia to hit some of the country's airfields. Ryazan, Voronezh, and Ivano were all targets, which makes sense given their proximity to Ukraine. However, Ukraine went one further, sending drones to an airfield in the Arctic Murmansk region, sending a message to Russia that it can score hits even in military installations that the Kremlin thinks are well out of Ukraine's reach. All of these strikes were successful. In Murmansk, a drone smashed into one of the airfield's runways, leaving behind a massive crater that makes the runway impossible for Russia's aircraft to use. The drones Ukraine sent to Ivano scored hits against a trio of the airfield's hangars, likely damaging a pair of Su-34 fighter jets in the process. In Voronezh, air defense platforms defending the base were targeted, which may hint that Ukraine is planning a follow-up attack on the airbase that will strike assets that these defenses can no longer protect. And in Ryazan, Ukraine struck an airfield fuel depot, triggering a series of explosions and secondary blasts while depriving the Ryazan airfield's jets of the fuel they need to take to the skies. Ukraine likely struck these targets to limit Russia's ability to launch missiles and glide bombs into Ukrainian territory from the bases. For much of the war, one of Russia's main aerial tactics has been to send its fighter jets into its own skies, from where they launch missiles and glide bombs without having to get anywhere close to Ukraine's air defenses. The Su-34 is one of Russia's favored aerial platforms for this task, as revealed by a November 2025 Joint Air Power Competence Center report. But any attack that damages a runway or destroys fuel is enough to stop Russia's aircraft from taking off. Again, it's about limiting the effectiveness of Putin's war machine. If the attacks on refineries and oil infrastructure are designed to limit fuel supplies and cut off the cash that Russia needs to fund the war, strikes on military targets like airfields reduce the strength of the assaults that Russia launches. Anything that takes Russian glide bombs and missiles out of the equation is good for Ukraine, as Russia uses both in massive quantities. As the UK's House of Lords Library revealed on October 27th, the period between October 5th and October 12th saw Russia pelt Ukraine with nearly 1,400 glide bombs and 92 missiles, along with 3,000 drones. The sheer scale of these assaults has been overwhelming Ukraine's air defenses, so relieving the aerial pressure through airfield strikes is very much needed for Ukraine. Ukraine's launching its largest ever aerial assault against Russia on December 11th must have elicited a response from the Kremlin or the Russian Defense Ministry, and it did, though that response was as typically Russian as it gets. As is so often the case when Ukraine succeeds with its aerial assaults, Russia has attempted to downplay what happened on December 11th. The country's authorities can't hide the fact that air raid warnings were issued in Moscow. People heard and followed those warnings, and not even the Kremlin can hide the evidence of people's ears, eyes, and feet away from them. But when it comes to the damage that Ukraine's drones caused against the many targets they struck outside of Moscow, the Russian Defense Ministry is keeping its collective mouth shut. As the Kyiv Post reports, the ministry released a brief statement during the morning hours after Ukraine's massive strike. It claimed that Russian air defenses had shot down 287 of Ukraine's drones, which would be most, but not all, of the 300 or so that Ukraine sent. Bear in mind that between 60 and 100 of these drones would have been shot down over Moscow, which Ukraine used as a decoy target. As for the damage caused by Ukraine's drones and missiles, the Russian Defense Ministry claims that it was all minimal. That clearly isn't the case, and Russia knows it. The same outlet adds that Ukraine's success on December 11th has contradicted past claims by US President Donald Trump that Ukraine has no cards. Trump made those claims back in March, at a time when Washington and Kyiv were at odds with one another. However, recent events suggest that Trump might have been swayed into once again thinking that a Russian victory in the Ukraine war is inevitable, which is a perception that Ukraine is desperate to disprove. On December 9th, CNN reported that Trump had made several recent claims that Ukraine is losing its war with Russia, and that Putin's forces now had the upper hand. Those claims came amidst a renewed push by the US to force through a peace agreement. Ukraine is willing to talk about almost all of the points in that proposed agreement, barring one: the idea that it could cede large swathes of its territory to Russia. Trump's pessimistic read of the war marks a dramatic reversal for the president. Just over 2 months ago, after meeting with Zelensky at the UN General Assembly in New York, Trump surprised observers by saying that he believed Ukraine could not only hold the line, but also win back all territory taken by Russia since the invasion and perhaps even more, CNN wrote on December 9th. Reports have also been circulating that the Trump administration has given Ukraine until Christmas to agree to the latest version of the peace proposal, which presumably still includes the ceding of the Donbass region that Putin wants to claim. RBC Ukraine says that these reports aren't strictly accurate. The outlet claims that its Ukrainian government source says the US would like a response to the latest peace draft, but there is no hard deadline for Ukraine to accept peace. Still, we're starting to see pressure mount from the US for Ukraine to accept a version of the peace that helps Russia far more than it helps Ukraine. December 11th was Ukraine's way of reminding Trump, along with Putin, of one very important fact. Ukraine is capable of doing far more damage to Russia than it has up until this point. With the gloves now off, and every oil facility and military installation within range of Ukraine's drones now considered a target, it would be unwise for anybody to count Ukraine out just yet. There's plenty more evidence of this fact if the US cares to look. A quick examination of the situation in the Black Sea should be more than enough to prove that Russia isn't as strong as Putin claims it to be. Putin's warships are hiding in fear, as Ukraine now owns the Black Sea. Find out why in our video, and remember to subscribe to The Military Show for more videos covering Ukraine's latest long-range strikes against Russia. And thank you for watching.